Hi, and thanks for joining us for this U&U Lab video on starting your own Unlearning Club. My name's Kirsten. I'm one of the U&U Lab research coordinators. I'm a cisgendered white settler. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm just going to be walking us through this little video where we hear some clips from Dr. Danielle Bain-Smith and Dr. Kate Youngblood on ways that they have made Unlearning Club work really well in the past for them that you might be able to apply in your settings. First, we always start with an acknowledgement of the inherent rights and title of First Nations people in what we now call BC. First Nations territories stretch to every inch of this province. Inherent rights that are rooted in the connection to the lands and waters have never been ceded or surrendered here in what we now call BC. These inherent rights are upheld in international, national, and provincial law. And longstanding Indigenous laws and systems are integrally tied to these lands and waters of these territories. Also, generations of Indigenous rights holders who are First Nations, Métis, and Inuit from elsewhere in Canada also call these lands and waters home. We also acknowledge the inherent rights to health and wellness of Indigenous peoples, BC First Nations, as well as Indigenous peoples from elsewhere in Canada. For example, Inuit, Métis, and First Nations from elsewhere have inherent rights to health and wellness. And then here on the slide are just some examples of the ways that colonial and settler obligations under international, national, and provincial law can kind of keep us accountable to change the way that we've been doing things. So next you're going to hear from Dr. Kate Youngblood, as well as Dr. Danielle Bain-Smith about the origin story of Unlearning Club, and then things to consider as you move forward in starting your own.
So the thing about why we started Unlearning Club is recognizing that those of us working in public health, most of us have received no or minimal education on how to do anti-racist public health practice. So I was in graduate school for 10 years. And I had one elective that focused on Indigenous health, and it included a foundation that helped me do Indigenous specific anti-racist practice, but very, very limited building that skill set. And so now we are being asked to do that. So there's like this real need to build our capacity in that area. And I think that's true of most people working in public health at present. The other thing that was really, really important and helped us think about this was that we have received such clear instructions that this capacity building and training is necessary for us within what we call the foundational obligations. And so those are here, UNDRIP 15, TRC, the Declaration Act Action Plan, the MMIWG 2S LGBTQIA+ calls for justice, the In Plain Sight report, the BC Cultural Safety and Humility Standard. All of these are calling to us to strengthen our muscles and learn. And so even though the focus of the U&U project was really to strengthen our ability to untie colonial knots and undo and eradicate Indigenous specific racism, an important step on that pathway was unlearning and building our capacity as a collective.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just add to that, Kate, that Kate was the one that built out the inaugural curriculum for us, and it was really important to us to orient ourselves to this work, not as experts or trainers or facilitators, but really to have the emphasis on the club, and as Kate just said, collective unlearning exercise. And I think that first round was really built off of many books that were already on Kate's bookshelf that, many of us have a library of content that we'd love to get through, and yet it's often off the side of our desks, or we're expected to do it at the end of a very long day. So some of the things that made Unlearning Club so successful in our office, at the Office of the Provincial Health Officer, I think, is that it was seen as valued core part of our work. So it was work that we did and do during our work hours. And what really made it beneficial, I think, was having this monthly structured space to actually get through that prep work and that homework, which is content that's already been created by First Nations, Métis, Inuit, or other people with lived experience of white supremacy and racism. And so that was another principle that oriented us to the work, was that we experienced, myself personally, but we also saw Indigenous people being called upon to come and do one-off learnings or teachings and trainings. And we know that that's such a drain. And so we really wanted to emphasize work and content that's already out in the world as a place to start. And the I guess last two things I would say, one of the things that's so important is that this club is voluntary, so it's not a mandatory experience. In our office, we had over 2/3 of the office that chose to participate, and so that really created a culture shift. The fact that it's monthly and ongoing means that in the interludes between sessions, there was a lot of conversation that was happening about that month's topics. And then the fact that Kate had mapped it to Dr. Kamara Jones's 3 tasks of anti-racism, of naming racism, asking how it's operating in our sphere of influence, and organizing and strategizing to act, gave it a helpful framework to hold all of the different learnings and unlearnings that we were doing in the club together.
Our colleagues had, when they came to us in the Unlearning Club, we didn't make any previous Indigenous specific anti-racism training a requirement, but because in the OPHO and the Ministry of Health, the SANYAS is a requisite for all humans, that became kind of a de facto prerequisite. And as Danielle has shared, Unlearning Club was voluntary. But we also had a couple of essential trainings that we put on at the OPHO as well, and that was mandatory for all people. And that was on the foundational obligations to Indigenous people. So those ones I mentioned previously, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and the BC Law and Action Plan, the 2 national reports, the TRC and the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Two-Spirit LGBTQIA+, Reclaiming Power and Place report, and then more health-focused ones, the In Plain Sight report. And so we do share the curriculum for that essential training, and that was really, really important for us. And we also were lucky to have a Thinking Intersectionally series, which helped us think about experiences of being Indigenous and other systems of oppression, such as ableism, homophobia and transphobia, and sexism and patriarchy.
So the Unlearning Club in its first form was 17 months long, and there's nothing magic about that number. That just happened to be the amount of time that was left in Kate's time with us at the Office of the Provincial Health Officer. And we were able to do a little bit of research alongside the Unlearning Club. And so we did learn some things about it. And we basically worked with our team to understand what are the things that they needed more of to be able to uphold their foundational obligations to Indigenous peoples. One of the key things that came across was the importance of enabling leadership. So the fact that the leader of our office, Dr. Bonnie Henry, not only gave permission for people to attend the Unlearning Club, but she role modeled it. So she was a participant. She showed up monthly, did her unlearning prep work, but she also was, approached her direction with a lot of love and care and compassion for the team, and recognized that this is a heavy lift. This is heavy, hard work. and that she directed people to if their choice was to join Unlearning Club, to talk to their supervisors and have a good conversation about what work were they going to be putting down in order to pick up this work, which is about 3 to 4 hours per month. And so it was really important for people to hear directly from her that the expectation and understanding is that Unlearning Club is a core part of our work and responsibility at the Office of the Provincial Health Officer, and that everybody's plates are already completely full. And so in order to engage in this work, it does require putting other work down. So that was something that was so helpful. Definitely having the operational support in terms of having Kate, who developed the schedule, navigated the club logistics, and developed the contents, and then hosted the sessions, was really an important part of that. Again, we really emphasize the fact that Kate is there as a convener and a host, not as an expert or a trainer. The sessions were voluntary. We've mentioned that a few times. They were not tied to employment or job performance. We really wanted this to be a safe space to do this unlearning, this very uncomfortable unlearning together. And we knew that that would be a hindrance, or a barrier would be if people felt that they were going to be judged on their job performance. And then one of the elements that created some of that safety was having closed cohorts. So once Learning Club was underway, new people were not included into those cohorts, so they had to wait for a new round of Unlearning Club, and that really created this sort of gelling over time and this safety within the groups.
So in this slide, we just go over more of the details of what each Unlearning Club session looks like. So it's monthly, it's 2 hours, and it's quite highly structured in the time that we would spend together. So we always start with the grounding and the land acknowledgement, and that's a rotating responsibility for folks. And in the next clip, we're going to hear Danielle talk a little bit more about why this is such a meaningful and important practice. The next section of time that we spend together is about 30 minutes, and that's an opening circle where everyone kind of goes around, and again, we'll hear a little bit more about how that is organized in circle protocol, but everyone gives a little bit of a reflection on the materials. That's just like kind of preliminary discussion points. The third section is mini module, and when one of the members of the U&U Lab is facilitating, they'll usually present a few slides. This one is awesome and can be optional if the host for the Unlearning Club is not, in your context, isn't feeling as comfortable doing that. But we kind of usually give about 5 slides, 15 minutes, and talking about some of the key themes that came up in the readings. Then we have a little bit of a break, and then we go into a discussion circle. So the first round, sometimes there's time for 2 rounds, sometimes there's time for 1, but there's usually some question prompts, and everyone goes around, again, using that circle format that you'll hear more about in the following clips. And then sometimes we like to end on kind of one word, one phrase that is sticking out for folks as they finish. And that's the 2 hours that we would normally spend together. So for the rest of this video, we're going to hear a few clips from Dr. Danielle Bain-Smith, Dr. Kate Youngblood, and then one of our U&U Lab students, Nicole Jules, who's Sequetmuk and Inkaklatmuk, and is working towards her Masters of Public Health.
One of the elements of Unlearning Club that I really found impactful was having the rotating responsibility of an extended land acknowledgement. And this was something that was worked in to give us an opportunity to go beyond those somewhat superficial acknowledgements that have become quite commonplace, and really take the time to reflect on them more deeply. And so as an Echo Dene and Métis person, I live on Lekwungen Tanakh, and so I consider myself an occupier similar to my settler colleagues. And so I have my own work to do to be in good relationships and to be a part of reconciliation on these particular territories. And what I found particularly interesting about the extended land acknowledgements is that over the course of 17 months, I had 3 or 4 opportunities to do that reflection and to learn more about the original inhabitants of these territories. And on, I think it was probably around the 3rd time that it was my responsibility, I felt quite stuck. And that was so eye-opening for me because obviously, this is an amazing community and nation that's been here for thousands of years, and there's no way that in 10 to 15-minute reflections, I could have learned everything that I need to know about Lekwungen and Lekwungen Tanakh. And so it was really opening up for me that way in which the resistance shows up and the way that we all have to do and engage more deeply with the work of repairing on the peoples whose territories we occupy. So I was able to push through that and continue to learn more about Lekwungen laws and protocols and to learn how to be a good guest on these territories. And clearly that's something that I'm going to be having to continue to do for the rest of my days here. So that is why I really like the extended land acknowledgements as a part of Unlearning Club.
So when we got started with Unlearning Club, we received guidance that meeting in racial affinity groups was a best practice for this kind of work. And what I came to understand that would mean would be that, okay, so we're going to be talking about 3 different systems of oppression a lot and in vulnerable ways. We're going to talk about settler colonialism. We're going to talk about Indigenous specific racism and racism more broadly. We're going to talk about whiteness and white supremacy. And so what the literature shares is that people who have similar relationships to those 3 systems of oppression, when they meet together, there can be a much more deeper and safer set of conversations, constructive and safe conversations that can happen. So the way we organized it in the OPHO was we had people who had experiences of unearned advantage in relation to white supremacy, unearned advantage in relation to Indigenous specific racism, and unearned advantage in relation to settler colonialism. So white people meet together in one group. And then we had people who had unearned advantage related to Indigenous specific racism, but unearned disadvantage in relation to racism more generally and white supremacy meet together in another group. And at the time, we only had one Indigenous colleague, and she was generously open to meeting in a mixed group. And so we really recommend that this kind of opportunity for racial affinity groups is something that you offer within your unlearning clubs too.
And I think the other thing we might add is that it's really about offering and making the opportunity available so that people can be self-determined, so they can decide in terms of which group they choose to be in. And the other element or consideration that we had was around lines of supervision, and our office does operate in a bit of a hierarchical fashion. So we also were thinking about that and making sure that people were in a space where they could share quite comfortably and feel not restricted in any way around what they were sharing in that space.
I think one of the things that came up as we brought this issue forward, because some people, especially white people, in that moment were like, well, I don't participate in white supremacy, so I don't think that I should be in the white group. And we started to explore that a little bit. There was definitely some people who, for example, if you have experiences of other unearned disadvantage, like disadvantage related to homophobia or disadvantage related to systemic ableism, it might feel uncomfortable to meet in a group based on your experience of unearned advantage. So we had to talk that through. We also had some people who were like, in my home country, would identify as white. But here in this country, people treat me like a foreigner. So where do I fit? And we got into some discussions about xenophobia. We got into some discussions about um, uh, speaking English as a second language and how that shows up in access to opportunity. Um, and so, what you can tell from our conversations is that these groups are really imperfect categories. They don't capture every dimension of people's lived and living experience. And so, we just did our best. And we found the way forward that worked in our setting.
We talk about Unlearning Club as being really hard heart work, and that it requires a lot of vulnerability and humility. And Ibram X. Kendi talks about confession as being the heartbeat of anti-racism. And so it really does require people to feel comfortable and safe enough to confess about the ways in which they have unwittingly or insidiously been a part of upholding Indigenous specific racism, which can be, as you can imagine, quite uncomfortable. And so one of the things that we found really helpful is having closed cohorts. So having the same group of people that meet month after month, so that over time you can develop that strong relationship and confidence that what you bring into that space will be met with generosity and grace and compassion. And together, you can begin to unpack and unlearn all of the ways in which that deeply embedded ideologies of white supremacy and Indigenous specific racism have coursed through your own work and your own lives. So closed cohorts have been really important for us. We'll acknowledge as well that that was a challenging decision to uphold, because when we got Unlearning Club started in our team, there was a lot of interest once it got started. It created a buzz and people would talk about Unlearning Club outside of Unlearning Club, which was great. We were integrating and applying what we were learning. But one of the challenges with that was that we had to uphold the principle of closed cohorts and we had to decline people's interest. So we would encourage you to think about how you will be able to integrate people and have perhaps rolling cohorts so that you can meet the interests that which will most likely come. That was our experience.
So one of the questions we get a lot is how should leadership and senior leadership be involved in Unlearning Club? And we have a lot of thoughts and perspectives on that one. Maybe I'll let you go first, Danielle.
Sure. One of the things that we found was such a critical aspect of the success of Unlearning Club in the first round in the office of the PHO was having Dr. Bonnie Henry, our provincial health officer, be such a keen and enthusiastic participant and role model. This is such a shift for a lot of people, and really a shift away from having cultural safety training or Indigenous specific racism training be something that's seen as a bit of an afterthought or something that gets squeezed in between other core responsibilities. And what was a dramatic shift for us when we ran this the first time was that Dr. Bonnie Henry named it as a specific core responsibility, and then really demonstrated enabling leadership by showing up every month, participating really enthusiastically, and then also integrating what she was learning at an Unlearning Club through the rest of the work and drawing it through and referencing it. So for us, that was a really key element because it allowed us not only to dedicate the time and space to doing the prep work and the Unlearning Club itself, but also to apply those unlearnings and learnings throughout the course of our work.
The other thing I think about is when she came to the launch event and spoke to colleagues about how she planned to show up and be a member, but also that she offered them the chance to have conversations with their own team leads about what it was that they could put down in order to pick this up. We know that everybody is working at full tilt now. And so asking people to take on responsibilities of unlearning, as Danielle said, it's not something we want people to do off the side of their desk, but actually as part of their day-to-day work during work time. So one of the things that we use in Unlearning Club when we meet together in person or virtually is a circle protocol.
Circle protocol is a safe place for people to share what they feel like sharing in that moment, and it's not an obligation to share. So if people would like to pass, that is totally okay.
Circle is so different than like regular meetings that we have at in health spaces that have more of like a popcorn style. And what I find really powerful about it is everybody has a chance to share their reflections. So every voice gets heard. We're all both leaders and learners in the circle. You're focusing on what you are heard, saw, or felt related to the materials that you're engaging with, rather than responding to somebody else's comments or thoughts in the circle.
Every First Nation has a different protocol on how they would do a circle, and it could depend on who is starting, who is involved in the circle, what is the circle for.
Depending on the territory, there's different protocols about which direction around the circle that you will go. Everybody has a chance to speak, and like Nicole said, you can pass, but you can also, we circle back to the people who pass just to double check that they don't have anything to add at that moment. Maybe they've gathered their thoughts, or we also talk about how what is shared in the circle stays in that circle, that each person who shares what they have shared, they are the owners of that thought or insight. So we don't have permission to share that outside, or to necessarily ask them to talk about it outside of the circle either. Like, they're in control of if they want to start that conversation with you outside the circle. And one of the things that has come up in our conversations is like, is it appropriate for a person like me, a white lady, to host a circle? And so that's a question that I went to my elders about. I checked in with Salkson Shane Point from Musqueam territory, and I was like, is this appropriate? And at the time, he shared with me, he said, remember the Knights of the Round Table, because I have a British background. And he was like, every place in the world has used circles to do work and get work done at some point in time. So he was like really emphasizing that nobody owns that kind of thing. So I'm really careful about recognizing that I am using a protocol, but I don't know all the deep, rich teachings and sacred elements of that circle. I only know what I've been taught just in the past sort of 10 years about it. But I do find it really, really helps to create an environment of being able to talk about a vulnerable subject that is really difficult to do in the more popcorn style of our regular Western style meetings.
I think the biggest question that I've heard people ask about who can host is if they're the right person to do that. And I would say that yes, like, you are the right person. And I think if you're asking that question, it shows that you are wanting to do this in a good way and with a. So I would say that there's no restrictions whatsoever, and it's always going to be yes. That, you know, we need more people taking up this work and doing all this work with their hands and their heart, and, you know, with their minds and with love and care, because that's how we're going to do it, is together.
One of the things that people ask when they think about hosting is, what am I going to do if racism comes up? And the answer is racism will come up. And I think the Unlearning Club, we are all learners in that situation. Like, none of us is perfectly formed with the diagnosis and treatment of racism. So it's about something that was really integral to the Unlearning Club in the Office of the Provincial Health Officer was having a lunch launch. So before we got started, we invited everybody from the office to come and have a beautiful lunch that was catered by Songhees Catering. And Bonnie stood up at that meeting and she shared her own commitment to Unlearning Club and openness to participate. Danielle had brought some hand-tied tobacco gifts for everyone. I had a few gifts as well, just to mark that really important start of hard heart work. And then later, when we were in a debrief at the end of the Unlearning Club 18 months later, someone shared with me that the thing that had kept them engaged the whole time was they felt that at that lunch launch they had made a commitment through accepting those gifts from Danielle and I, and that helped keep them involved even when it was uncomfortable and when busy schedules got caught up. So we are big fans of the lunch launch and recommend them for everybody.